within an approximate. He continues, as you can see on the tape, he continues to flank him to the right is how I would describe it. And again, that's where Lieutenant Murphy said he didn't expect that. He thought, as you can see in the tape, Mr. Page is initially heading to the southwest. He just presumed that he was attempting to get away. Now, as I indicated, I've used essentially 4 pieces of significant evidence. It's the 911 tapes just to place in time the response of the police department. They're there within 2 to 3 minutes. Officer Murphy, or Lieutenant Murphy's on scene almost immediately. He's making an assessment. He indicated that because of the medical condition of the victims in the parking lot, he wanted to obtain a ballistic shield. He intended to initially go back to his squad to get that ballistic shield. When he was going back to the squad, that's when he first detects Page walking to the southwest. Can't surmise whether Page saw him at that point in time, but at some point in time they locked eyes with each other and the firing began. And so from that period on, numerous shots, and again, the chief will describe to you the significant injuries that Lieutenant Murphy suffered, but it went on for a significant period, and there's no question in my mind that Lieutenant Murphy's intervention prevented Page from continuing this rampage, either by getting to his car and taking it to a different location. The time he spent that allowed Officer Linda to arrive on scene is probably the difference between other people being killed in this incident.
Officer Linda, as you watch this video, you watch it many times, looking through your mind, how are you doing now 5 weeks later?
Looking forward to getting back to work. I look at the video, and I've played it over several times, and it was something that we trained for through the state. Nationally, we trained for active shooter ever since Columbine. It's something that we have been training long and hard for, and this is the first time that we were actually able, as law enforcement, to put it into effect. It was a combination of many officers that arrived at that day. When the entire tape will come out, you'll see a lot more of what had happened with it.
What was your mindset? Because you see a squad car in the distance. You don't know if Officer Murphy is safe at this point. The gunman's still going on. Kind of paint the picture for us. What was going through your head as you pulled up there?
Well, as I pulled up, I saw the individual coming at me, and it's just something that I had a sense that this was not right. He was coming at me, and the way he was marching at me was an aggressive manner. It's not like someone raising their hands asking for help. That's why I initially backed up, gave myself that distance, saying this is time now to go to a squad rifle, which we've trained to do. Backed up, got my squad rifle out, went through the checklist that we trained for law enforcement. He had a weapon, he had an intent, he had a delivery system. I went through those. I knew I had those factors. I had a target. I acquired it. I isolated it. We were in preclusion mode where, no other things would work. It wouldn't be advisable for use a taser to try to OC this gentleman. It was time to use deadly force, which I was privileged to do at that time. Yes, he was in a parking lot of a church. There were other people around. There's a theory that we have called the greater danger theory, that it's better to take the shot, and even if you miss and may strike a bystander, to stop that threat that's going there. From what we've seen now already, we know that he was on a mission to cause havoc. He had to be stopped, and that's why I decided to shoot at that time. I didn't know at that time, because in the video, as it proceeds later, you'll see our reaction to that. Our first thing was to stop the threat, and then was a search for Lieutenant Murphy and the other people that were in the parking lot. But I can't comment on that because of the continuing investigation.
There are people in the press and news conferences who describe your actions and Lieutenant Murphy as heroic, being heroes. How would you describe your actions given the video that we're seeing?
Hero weighs heavy. I'm just an officer who did my job. No different than the other 200-some officers that responded that day. No better, no worse.
You were a very good shot.
Thank you.
The FBI did, during the news conference, take a look at the Dashcam video during their investigation. I know we can't comment on that, but they described that particular shot as paraphrasing as being extremely brutal. Is what, I guess, again, paraphrasing what I recall them saying. Hearing what they had said, what is your reaction to how someone else in law enforcement describes it?
Like I said, we train for this. I'm very fortunate to be in a department that trains monthly, probably more than other departments do around the state. And Maybe that's the reason he picked here. He didn't know that, but we were fortunate in the training that we have here at Oak Creek. It's above and beyond what many departments do.
Officer Linda, it seems pretty clear now that we're watching this video that you distracted Mr. Page. I mean, now that you look at it and you kind of see it in the context and you know what sort of that global, universal looking down, I mean, if you had not pulled up at that moment, it's highly unlikely Lieutenant Murphy would be alive.
That's a good summation, yes.
Talk about that realization. That must have been a point at which you realized that.
That wasn't until way later, until we located where Lieutenant Murphy was and did an officer rescue on him, that that started to sink in.
Have you talked to him about it?
I've seen him 3 times. The problem is he cannot communicate the best, so we'll have a sit-down, heart-to-heart talk later.
You saw the gun, and the gun was 60 yards away from you, but you physically saw the weapon he had in his hand?
I saw an object in his hand which mimicked a firearm, and the motions that he did with the loading and unloading after spending 30 years in law enforcement and training, that mimicked a reload. Plus, when he raised the weapon up in that shooting position, and even before that, I was being fired upon, and I made a radio transmission saying, can you confirm shots in the parking lot? Which were probably directed at me and just had not hit the squad at that time.
So when you fired the rounds, you were convinced that that man was armed and he was your suspect?
Yes, he was.
In your career, have you ever been fired upon before or been in a similar situation like this?
I've been involved in one other shooting, yes. 92? 92. Can't comment on that, though. Miraculous. No, he's at home.
John, just to clarify, so did Page just pumping rounds into Murphy at like 10 foot, from 10 feet away?
You'll have an opportunity to really kind of dissect the video yourselves, but what stands out to me is that he's not. There's a deliberateness about him. He moves fast at certain times, but other times he's moving very slow, and so it's not. It would not be consistent with a person, for example, that was seeking cover and trying to return fire from a covered position. He never did so. But yes, he was from the moment that he first acquired target acquisition of Lieutenant Murphy. He was closing in on Lieutenant Murphy. That leaves no question in my mind that he intended to kill him, and the number of injuries that Lieutenant Murphy suffered are significant. And I think the chief has updated information on that.
Through no prompting, Lieutenant Murphy came in last week and he visited with us, and he had a real good visit with the officers on day shift and some others that came in, and we spent a lot of time together. And it was reported, I know the hospital had put out a press release that he was shot 8 to 9 times, and as we were going on, there was no reason to follow up, really. He's alive, so we really didn't care, but he decided to let us know he's been able to finally do an assessment of himself after getting home and looking, and the total number of rounds that struck Lieutenant Murphy were 15. 12 hit him and 3 hit his vest. 9 millimeter. So, I mean, there was a lot of talk about the 8 to 9 rounds. That's what the doctors were not really concerned about. That I know that's something that people asked for. They were just worried about treating him through that number out there is what we were given. No reason to follow up on that, really. He's alive and we were good, and he just kind of offered it up Friday, said, I finally got a chance.
So he was just unloading on Murphy while Murphy's on the ground.
From his statement, that's pretty much what happened.
Are there other cameras that you've not released or haven't released yet?
Yes.
What do those contain?
When those come out, we're not going to talk about them. There's still an ongoing investigation. That's why they're not being released. When they are,
The investigation be over.
we don't have a timeline on that right now. The FBI is still investigating. If you'd like to ask U.S. Attorney Santel on any of those questions, you can. But it's continuing right now. Yes, there's things that have to go through, so we're waiting. We're waiting on that.
The audio on the beginning on Lieutenant Murphy's squad, was that removed as well, or there just wasn't any on?
He didn't have his mic on. There's a switch you turn on, and he didn't have it turned on. And that's as simple as it is. We've had that before. But Officer Linda had his on. You can hear that clearly. He's picked it up. Yes.
Have you ever competed in the Police Olympics or any kind of shooting competitions?
Yes, I was on the 4-man team that represented Oak Creek in the Pan Am Games for the Olympics. We took a silver and a gold.
If I could just briefly add that, again, I relied heavily on the medical examiner's report. There were 2 bullets removed from Mr. Page. One of them was a 5.56 millimeter round. That's consistent with Officer Linda's weapon. That wound entered the right side abdominal area and traversed right to left, but the round was recovered. So there's no question, again, corroborated by the videotape, that what brought him down was Officer Linda's round. The final sound you hear on this tape is a shot fired. The officers interpret that as being shot at again by Page. A 9 millimeter round was recovered from Mr. Page's skull, and again, that entered on the right side and traversed right to left. So both rounds were recovered. The Oak Creek Police Department arms their officers with .45 caliber Heckler and Koch USP pistols. One casing was recovered on scene. That would be Lieutenant Brian Murphy's only discharge round. The only other rounds fired by the Oak Creek Police Department were from Officer Linda.
So the other round was this.
That's correct. The fatal round, the determination of the medical examiner was that the fatal round was self-inflicted.
That he was incapacitated by Officer Linda's shot.
I think that's a reasonable interpretation. I think that's a reasonable interpretation.
Officer Linda, it's very clear that you take your professionalism as an officer very seriously. There is a personal side to anything like this. How are you doing with your family? Things like that. Have you had counseling? And your response to this, what would you say to other police officers?
I've availed myself to our employee assistance program over here, and I've been talking with fellow church members, fellow officers, and officers I know throughout the state and the country who have lent a whole lot of support.
You comment all about the difference. We heard a lot about people all around the country, in the community that reached out, so they were praying for you, they were thinking of you, and talk about how that made you feel, how that affected you.
It was very well received. It was nice to know that all the training that we've gone over for the last 10 years and the hard work that everybody's put in, every law enforcement trainer, finally paid off, where we were, as law enforcement community, able to intervene and stop somebody before it became more tragic.
Is there any specific training, classes, courses, curiosity?
We teach in-service here on our own department for active shooter, officer rescue, civilian rescue. We teach it at the recruit level. It's taught at the specialty level and on national training that goes on.
Teaching is one thing. Having an example or training is one thing. How different was it to experience it in real time, in real life?
It goes very slow. Things slow down, and in real life, there's a million things that go through your mind at that time, and you just work through it. And then when you look at, the tape now, I look back and I say, I know I did things, but at the time I didn't know what order I put them in. And now I can go back with the tape and say, yeah, now I know what order I put it in.
And I'm sorry, officer, I was just asking if you had the opportunity to talk to the families of the victims.
I was able to meet at the candlelight vigil with some of the victims' families, with some of the people who were at the church that day, and talked with them, yes.
I just want to reiterate one thing when Sam talks about some of the training, just so you have an idea. When Sam mentioned earlier, he talked about weapon intent delivery system. We have to have that, and then we have to have target isolation, acquisition, and identification, and then preclusion. There's nothing else to do. Greater danger. He's got less than a tenth of a second for that to go through his head. We have to do that every time when we're in a situation like this. And when he's saying a lot of things go through your head, those are all the things that kick in during training. So he had to do all of that before he ever decided to pull that trigger. So those are things that officers train on. And when Sam also mentioned the came together, at least I'm not aware, there may be others, but it's very rare that in an active shooter situation, the police are able to get there and stop the shooter. Usually they take their own life prior to police getting there. And in this case, from the training that we had, our officer stopped an active shooter.
When he gets out, when Officer Murphy gets out there, and Lieutenant Murphy gets out of his car, is there a victim off to the left? Or is there a victim near him when he actually goes down?
If you look at when the video was played, there were some pixelated areas off to the left there. Those are victims.
He comes out, he sees the victim, then he sees the shooter, and he goes to a different location at that point, behind that little island area, and then that's when they're locked in. So
Yeah.
there's no victim near him when he actually goes down.
No, he leaves the area of the victims when he encounters Page and walks out to the right to give him verbal commands at that point. And that's when he's hit and goes behind the car and ducks behind the car for cover.
And 2 victims to the left where you had the pixelation?
Yes.
Have you recovered all of Officer Lenda's other rounds and you're comfortable that they didn't hit anything?
That I'm not going to comment on because that's part of the FBI. Their evidence team was there, so I couldn't really comment on it. They have that information. And,
You have no indication that any of his rounds did anything other than was intended, right?
no, and I wouldn't, knowing Sam Linda, I wouldn't believe they would.
Officer, were you among the officers who eventually entered the temple after all of this? What did you do after this?
Again, I can't comment on that because of the ongoing investigation. I can go any questions up to this point here, I'll be more than happy to ask. Later, we can answer those.
Now that you've been able to slow things down a little bit, I know that day it's really fast, but now that things have slowed down, are you able to share with us sort of some of the things that stick with you from that day?
I guess one of the thoughts that went through my head was, how can one city have this happen twice? This is the second one for Oak Creek. We had the Comfort Suites incident with the shooter there, and now a second one for one city. And it's mind-boggling to me. After I was sitting thinking about this, how can one city have two of them? I fired 6 rounds.
This will be the last one. Then we're gonna end it. And if anyone needs clarification afterwards, they'll stick around for that. But the Comfort Suite shooting happened in 2004. We had an individual go into the Comfort Suites and ended up killing 2 people, shooting 3 others, and then took a hostage. And our team, which Sam was part of, went in and got the individual out. He's now serving 2 life terms. His name was Gregory Phillips.
Bottom line, Chief, why is it important for the public to see this video?
It's important for a couple reasons. First of all, you look at what the officers did, their response. As far as I'm concerned, it's textbook on what happened and how they responded, the radio traffic, what they did, how they positioned themselves, and it shows both officers, Lieutenant Murphy first, arriving on scene when he did, saving lives, I believe, because of when he got there, engaging the individual like we're trained to do in an active shooter, and then when Officer Lenda arrives on scene, you see the steps he takes. One thing he didn't mention to you, there's a radio transmission that Lieutenant Murphy on his radio says, have victims, I need an ambulance, and I don't see the shooter. Within seconds of that is when Officer Lenda pulls up that drive. When he pulls up that drive, he sees that individual at a distance. And again, these are the things that go into the training and making sure, and this is where Sam was spot on with all his decisions. He sees an individual, and just seconds before he had gotten a transmission that, I'm here, I don't see a shooter. Well, he can't see Lieutenant Murphy, but he sees an individual. Instead of driving up to say, hey, did you see anything? He realizes this isn't right. His decision, again, is spot on. He backs up, gets some distance to reevaluate the situation, and then makes a decision from seeing the subject again that he's got the gun, he's the one we're looking for. So it shows you the heroic act of the officers and also the police work that they did and how it all worked well, their training, everything went into place. And it took care of the situation very quickly and ended it.
Out of the car, that round that the suspect fired, not hit him, right?
It hit the headrest.
Chief, quick question, just to clarify, when this information initially came out, it sounded as if, and maybe this is just me, contrary somewhat to active shooting training that I've understood, which is that you don't give aid to a victim until you acquire and eliminate the target. This is very clearly different than that. He did not stop, just so I'm clear on what I'm seeing, he did not stop to give aid and was ambushed in the process of giving aid. He sees the victim engage the target right away, which is,
Okay.
it sounds like it's something different.
It is. It's a subtle difference, but what you're seeing is when Lieutenant Murphy shows up on scene, he goes to the aid of the victims. There is no shooting going on. This is not an active shooter at that point. He is searching. You see him turning, almost pivoting and looking to see what it is. His radio transmission is, I don't see the shooter. So we don't have an active shooter. Active shooter is just that. When you hear sounds of shots, you go to them. That's what we're trained to do. There were no shots. The individual came out of the temple in the video, and then he approached him as if he would someone who wasn't actively shooting, but he was investigating more and calling that person out verbally. The shots then started at that point. So when he went around the car and dove and he was hit, At that point, when he came around the car, he was ambushed that point when he went. So he did go to the victims first. So you don't want to blur that line of active shooter, leave the, you know, you don't tend to, there was no active shooter when he arrived. There was no shooting going on at that particular point. Does that clarify that for you? All right, that's all we'll take right now. Appreciate your time. Like I said, Officer Lenda is not available for one-on-one, but if you need any clarification, I'll stick around for you. Thank you very much.